Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, tensions deepen in Senegal as critics of the government's postponement of this month's elections are banned from holding protest marches. Their calls for the respect of human rights as mobile internet is suspended again. Also, you've brought happiness to all Ivorians. The elephants are still on parade over their AFCON victory over Nigeria. Members of the squad and the coach responsible for their turnaround are gifted huge cash bonuses and houses in a presidential ceremony. And more women in Sudan are taking up arms amidst the ongoing conflict that has devastated the country since last April. Many learning in semi-formal training camps, saying that they're set on defending their loved ones if necessary. But first, internet access was cut in Senegal on Tuesday ahead of a banned protest rally against the postponement of presidential elections that had been due this month. President Macky Sall's decision to push the February 25th poll back to December has sparked a political crisis. Protesters had planned on holding a silent march on Tuesday, but some feared that that could spill over into violence after 3 people were killed in a crackdown on rallies last week. Clovis Kasali brings us more from Dakar.
Today, the streets of Dakar were calm, but the opposition held press conferences stating loud and clear that the fight is far from over. First, the coalition of opposition parties calling all Senegalese citizens to get involved. There were now 2 sides, with them representing the side of truth and law. And then you have the Sunu election platform made up of civil society groups. It said that Senegal is currently experiencing an unprecedented democratic and constitutional crisis. Let's take a listen to one of its leaders.
It's by coming together that we'll be able to shake things up, and we'll keep mounting pressure as next week we're going to stay home en masse in protest. There will be people from the private sector. The telecoms union will go on strike because it's unacceptable lines keep getting cut. It's against the law. We're starting to live in a lawless state.
Police authorities banned what was set to be a peaceful march, and the government decided to cut internet mobile access, it says, to prevent the spread of hateful messages. Meanwhile, it does seem that the phase of national dialogue is underway, with President Macky Sall meeting with political opponents. Some participants to the talks say that progress has been made towards a law of amnesty. It could possibly, in the near future, help for the release of politicians currently in jail.
Clovis Kasali there for us. Now, dozens of people have died and several are still missing in the wake of a collision between 2 boats on the Congo River in DR Congo on Monday. Both boats were overloaded with passengers and cargo when they ran into each other east of Kinshasa. It's still not clear how many on board managed to be rescued. And the party is still not over for a joyous Ivory Coast, which is still riding high over its victory in the Africa Cup of Nations before a home crowd. Now, on Tuesday, the Elephants and their coach, Emerse Faé, received national honours from the president. Members of the squad were also given cash and houses for their triumph. Federica Ball tells us more.
They may have brought home their 3rd title as champions of Africa. And in the words of Ivory Coast's president, they'd also brought happiness to all Ivorians as he honoured the Elephants' stunning triumph in a presidential ceremony.
You truly deserve this national recognition. All Ivorians, without exception, were with you not only in support but also in prayer. You've created a spark of patriotism, pride and cohesion. You cannot imagine the extent to which you have succeeded in uniting Ivorians into a single people. Thank you. All of you.
All members of the squad also received bonus payments of 50 million CFA francs and a villa of the same value, as well as receiving the National Order of the Ivory Coast, the highest public distinction for their contribution to the state.
Mr. President, here on this team we have children from every region of Ivory Coast. And we've shown the country that a united Ivory Coast is capable of many things.
The presidential honours come after national jubilation across the West African country after their storybook win, including a victory parade at the stadium and all-night festivities in the streets. Ivory Coast are the first host nation to win the championship since 2006, and they'll be defending their title in 2025's tournament in Morocco.
The World Health Organization has rung the alarm, warning that it's braced for a summer in Sudan that might trigger catastrophic levels of hunger in the war-torn country. The warning has flagged a perfect storm heading into the April to July lean season, when stocks dwindle ahead of the next harvest. There are also fears expressed by UNICEF that the conflict could leave over 700,000 children severely malnourished. Kathy Clifford-Kadir has more.
Calling on the world to stop turning a blind eye to the conflict in Sudan. UNICEF warned tens of thousands of children's lives hang in the balance. 10 months of civil war between the country's military and the paramilitary rapid support forces has left its infrastructure devastated, sparking warnings of famine.
Consequences of the past 300 days mean that more than 700,000 children are likely to suffer the most dangerous form of malnutrition this year. UNICEF won't be able to treat more than 300,000 of those without improved access and without additional support. In that case, tens of thousands would likely die.
Some 4 million children are among the 10.7 million people now displaced by the conflict. Deploring the lack of funds collected in previous appeals, the agency is calling for €780 million to help over 7.5 million of the country's most vulnerable children this year.
But with no sign of a ceasefire, we have to focus instead on two things: safe, sustained and unimpeded humanitarian access across conflict lines, and international support to help sustain the essential services that children rely on to survive. Currently, we have neither.
UNICEF also reported a 5-fold increase in verified cases of children being killed, raped or recruited from 1 year ago.
Well, those 10 months of fighting that have gripped Sudan have decimated vast areas of the country. The violence has seen more women taking up arms to defend themselves and their families. Some have been learning combat skills in hastily put together training camps. Clarice Fortuné tells us more.
Standing in line, women are waiting to train to use weapons at this combat training camp in Port Sudan, one of many set up across the country after the Sudanese army called on civilians to take up arms. Some women say they come to show solidarity with their family members conscripted to fight for the Sudanese military. Others want to learn to defend themselves and their loved ones. Clashes between the Sudanese military, led by General Abdel Fattah Burhan, and the Rapid Support Forces, commanded by General Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, erupted last April in the capital Khartoum, before quickly spreading to other parts of the country. Both sides have since been accused of war crimes by rights groups. The United Nations says at least 12,000 people have been killed in the conflict, millions displaced internally and in neighboring countries, causing the biggest humanitarian crisis.
You know, when you look at what's happening in the Middle East and Gaza, when you look at what's happening in Ukraine, there's a lot of competing demands for limited donor dollars. Sudan is the biggest humanitarian crisis we have today, and we desperately need international support.
Sudan regional partners in Africa have been trying to mediate an end to the conflict, along with Saudi Arabia and the United States, ending up with rounds of unsuccessful talks between the warring parties.
Well, going back to Ivory Coast, in Yamoussoukro, the capital, the Basilique de Notre-Dame de l'Épée dominates the city skyline. The presidential palace is surrounded by 3 artificial lakes. And, well, they're dominated by something far less serene. They're populated by some pretty notorious crocodiles. Considered sacred by some, they have not granted those few victims that they are rumoured to have eaten over the years the same reverence. Take a look.
Across the riverbank, the residence of former President Félix Houphouët-Boigny, who left his mark on the history of Ivory Coast, is still standing tall. But for these visitors, the palace is not the only center of attention. Below, more than 300 crocodiles are swimming right in the middle of the capital. They belonged to the former head of state, who used to collect them.
President Houphouet's crocodiles were first given to him by the president of Mali in 1961. The president of Mali came on an official visit to Ivory Coast. Modibo Keita was his name, and he gave crocodiles to the president of Ivory Coast, who put them in the lake in front of his house. This is the very origin of crocodiles.
Today, what we now call the president's caimans have become a tourist attraction.
I came to Yamoussoukro to support the Senegal Lions in the Africa Cup of Nations, and I'm taking this opportunity to do a bit of sightseeing, particularly to visit the famous Cayman Lake next to the former palace of President Houphouët-Boigny. And it was an opportunity for me to see the caimans come out and be fed with chickens thrown to them by the public.
In addition to admiring the beasts, many people also come to feed them, often with live animals like sheep or chicken, a gesture that's seen by some as a mystical act.
It means a lot to us because we can come and talk to them. Because according to our Baoulé customs, you can come and explain your problem, your wishes and all that, and then they can sort things out for you. That's what my parents told me.
One thing is for sure, today no one swims in the lake of Yamoussoukro. And since one of their handlers was eaten in 2015, the president's caimans are now left to fend for themselves.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us. Do so again if you can. Till then, take care.